Well, the NFL wants to implement the hip drop tackle for the 2024 season, making it a penalty to commit a hip drop tackle. The NFLPA saying on this proposal today, drop it. Welcome everybody to JG9 News. We talk all things NFL all the time. I'm Jawagir and I represent the 904 from the 602, and today we are talking about the hip drop tackle, a controversial rule change that could be in place for the 2024 season. Everyone's meeting down in Orlando next week to go over some changes for 2024 regarding the rules. Kickoffs are going to be on the agenda for sure. We're going to possibly have some changes to the clock in terms of tenths of a second at the final minute of each half instead of what is right now, where it's just the seconds. And on top of that, the big one, the hip drop tackle being a possible change for 2024, where it could be illegal to commit a hip drop tackle. The NFL putting out this proposal saying that it is a foul if a player uses the following technique to bring a runner to the ground. If they grab the runner with both hands or wrap the runner with both arms and unweight themselves by swiveling and dropping their hips and or lower body, landing on and trapping the runner's leg at or below the knee. This was submitted by the Competition Committee and the Health and Safety Advisory Committee for player safety reasons. And if a player commits this penalty, it's a loss of 15 yards and an automatic first down. And the NFLPA is absolutely livid about this. They do not want this proposal to go through. Even though it would improve player safety, even though it reduces the chance of injuries, the NFLPA is saying, wait a second, timeout. This is not a good rule change. Do not let this go into effect. In a statement put out by the NFLPA, they say, the players oppose any attempt by the NFL to implement a rule prohibiting a swivel hip drop tackle. While the NFLPA remains committed to improvements to our game with health and safety in mind, we cannot support a rule change that causes confusion for us as players, for coaches, for officials, and especially for fans. We call on the NFL again to reconsider implementing this rule. So the NFLPA very bluntly saying, we do not want the hip drop tackle rule to go into effect. It should not be a penalty to commit the hip drop tackle. Player safety in mind with the NFL's proposal. We also saw what happened with Mark Andrews in that Thursday Night Football game between the Ravens and the Bengals, and how his regular season was over after the hip drop tackle. They might be saying, how is this any different from when they banned helmet-to-helmet hits about a decade and a half ago? How is this any different? You might be saying, okay, well, defenders, they'll just have to adjust like they did with helmet-to-helmet. And there was like all this controversy about, well, it's football. Guys are going to get injured. And what are defenders supposed to do? Well, let's think about this logically. Hip drop tackles don't impact the brain. Hip drop tackles do not impact your long-term health. Last time I checked, I'm not at a greater chance of dying and forgetting who I am and doing simple tasks because I broke my knee at 25 with a hip drop tackle. Long-term health, hip drop tackle changes absolutely nothing with long-term health versus helmet-to-helmet where it massively impacts the brain. On top of that, hip drop tackle, this rule change will not change participation in the sport. Helmet-to-helmet, there was genuine concern when people were getting head injuries. We're becoming more aware of this, that people would stop playing football. Parents know the risks now, and they might not have their kids play football anymore. This changes absolutely nothing. You know you can get hurt playing football. You know that there is a chance that a tackle could go wrong and you injure a part of your body. This rule change changes absolutely nothing. The NFLPA does not want the hip drop tackle in place for 2024. They do not want this rule proposal to go through. I'm with the NFLPA 100%, and I can see why the NFLPA, even though it would improve player safety to some extent, doesn't want this rule change to go through. I can think of three major reasons why. Number one, it's impossible to enforce. The NFL officiating is not that good as it is. They can barely officiate as things stand what current things are. You can't tell what a catch is now. And that's with the benefit of replay with slow motion and multiple angles. You expect officials to be able to properly enforce this? Look at the same thing with roughing the passer too. That is way less arbitrary than this rule. You just can't hit the quarterback after he throws the football. We can't even do that right. There's body weight issues. There's how many steps did they take. We can barely officiate that as it is. You think the officials nowadays can properly enforce hip drop tackle? It's going to be tough. It's going to be absolutely tough. Number 2, safety for players off the field is compromised tremendously if they do this. Yes, on the field it might help, but off the field it is compromised tremendously. And here's what I mean by that. Some fans are absolutely crazy. Some fans are absolutely psycho. Let's say a player does a hip drop tackle. Let's say it happens and it injures a player. Now, in 2023, 2022, any other year where it's not penalized, you might be thinking to yourself, oh man, that stinks. Hope the player feels better. That's just a part of the game. Now, if you throw the flag, you're making it very clear, wait a sec, that is not a part of the game. That was a dirty play, quote unquote, to do that hip drop tackle. And fans who are now upset that their player got injured as a result of this quote unquote dirty play are going to do things to said player with social media, sending death threats, sending a lot of hate and whatnot. It's a horrible, horrible world we live in that regard, but I can just see the safety of players off the field being compromised tremendously if you implement this rule and make it clear that what this player did was illegal, and as a result, a player on the other team got injured. The other thing, what do penalties mean besides impacting the game in terms of 15 yards on that first down? Penalties equal fines. What do fines mean? Players feeling hits from the league office in their wallets. We already see that with roughing the passer. How many times do we see days after the game the NFL issue all these fines for players that committed roughing the passer penalties? And sometimes you're like, wait a second, why did they get fined for that? That seemed like a horrible call at the start. Why are they getting fined for that? Well, obviously the NFLPA wants to protect the players and their wallets and their money, and it feels like the hip drop tackle will not do that in the slightest bit. On top of that, a big hip drop tackle that leads to a penalty that might be highly controversial, more chances for the player to criticize it in the media, on Twitter, in press conferences and whatnot, and that leads to them getting fined. So players are going to feel a direct financial hit as a result of this hip drop tackle rule being implemented, either through the league office or because they speak out about it when a penalty gets called or doesn't get called for that regard. It's just way too arbitrary of a rule. It is way too arbitrary of a rule. I get wanting to make the game safer. Believe me, I completely get that. But at the same time, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? At the end of the day, defenders have it hard enough. It's football. Guys are going to get injured. If you're restricting where guys can tackle in that sense, where you can't wrap your arms around the guy and hit below the knee, like what are we doing? What are we honestly doing here? Like, there's only so much you can take away from football and safety-wise before it becomes a completely different sport. And we might be getting to that territory if the NFL implements the hip drop tackle. But we know where the NFLPA stands on this. They are not in favor of this rule change whatsoever. They are not in favor of this proposal. So we'll just have to wait and see next week when everyone meets down in Orlando if we will have the hip drop tackle rule in place for the 2024 season. Well, I have no clue how it's going to go. I have no clue which way the owners are leaning. I have no clue which way the competition committee is leaning. I have no clue if it's going to be implemented or not implemented. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see starting next week. But what are your thoughts on the hip drop tackle? Do you think that it should be banned? Do you think that the NFLPA has a point? Whose side are you on, the NFLPA or the NFL owners and whatnot and the competition committee? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. That's going to do it for this episode of JG News. Be sure you like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check my main channel, JaguarGator9, where we talk all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is JaguarGator9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.